We don't know all of their names, but we know what they did. Their actions and their courage changed a nation for the better. Someone once said that only after being in the deepest valley can one appreciate being on the highest mountain. For African Americans living in America's South in the mid-20th century, the valley was deep and the struggle was constant. But by 1955, the tide was beginning to turn. It had only been a year since the landmark Brown versus the Board of Education ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court, which outlawed segregation in America's public schools, a ruling that met with, at times, violent resistance. But for the millions who were riding public transportation, notably buses and trains, segregation was still the law of the land. Jim Crow laws, as they were known, relegated African Americans to the back seats of city buses, seats that would be given up to a white passenger if there was no room in the front. Failure to give up one seat meant being arrested. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks, a 42-year-old seamstress, boarded a city bus following a long day at work in her home city of Montgomery, Alabama. She was seated in the rear section of the bus, but moments later, a white passenger stepped aboard. The front seats were full, and when the bus driver told Mrs. Parks to give up her seat, she refused, saying she was tired and shouldn't have to. She was arrested and charged with violating the city's segregation ordinance. Community leader E.D. Nixon posted bail for Mrs. Parks and then said to her, "Rosa, with your permission, we can break down segregation with your case." Her arrest sparked an outcry among the black citizens of Montgomery. Community leaders banded together and formed the Montgomery Improvement Association. The group needed a leader and chose a 26-year-old pastor from the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, the Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr.
With understanding, goodwill, and Christian love, we can integrate the buses Montgomery with no difficulty. And I don't believe that we are ever going back to any segregated buses.
It was supposed to be a one-day protest, but at a rally on December 8th, the citizens of Montgomery voted unanimously to continue the boycott indefinitely. But would it work? There had been other boycotts in the past, most recently in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But the movement in Montgomery had a new ally: television. There was still the problem of how thousands of black Montgomery citizens would get to work each day. So community leaders organized an elaborate carpooling system where those who waited at designated locations would be picked up and driven to work. Those who chose not to ride walked. Those who were against the boycott fought back. On January 30th, King's home was bombed, his wife and infant child barely escaping with their lives. The next day, another bomb exploded at the home of E.D. Nixon. Still, despite the setbacks, the boycott continued. Local merchants were angry because many blacks were also avoiding shopping in downtown stores. City officials obtained injunctions against the boycott and indicted 80 of its leaders, including Dr. King, charging them with conspiring to interfere with lawful business. The case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which threw it out without comment. It was Dr. King's first major victory. That November, the United States Supreme Court ruled that segregation in public transportation was unconstitutional. City leaders in Montgomery knew the battle was lost, but dragged their heels when it came to enforcing the landmark ruling. It was not until mid-December, more than a year after the boycott began, that Dr. King was able to stand before his friends and say,
"The executive board of the Montgomery Improvement Association recommends that the 11-month-old protest against the city buses will be called off and that the Negro citizens of Montgomery, Alabama will return to the buses on a non-segregated basis.
The next morning, Dr. King joined the first group of African Americans as they boarded Montgomery's first non-segregated city bus. It was the birth of the modern civil rights movement, a major victory, won not with weapons, but with courage, all beginning with a woman who would stand up by sitting down.